Officer Harper Davis had been working the graveyard shift in Riverside County for 8 years. But the call that came through dispatch at 2:47 a.m. on March 15th would become the one that made her question everything she thought she knew about her job. The request seemed routine enough. A welfare check on 73-year-old Eleanor Whitman at 1247 Oak Street. Mrs. Whitman's neighbor, Janet Collins, had called 911 expressing concern that she hadn't seen the elderly woman in 4 days, which was unusual since Eleanor maintained a strict daily routine of collecting her mail at exactly 10 a.m. and watering her front garden every evening at sunset. Officer Davis pulled into the driveway of the modest single-story ranch house, noting that the porch light was on and the newspapers from the past 3 days were stacked neatly by the front door. The house appeared well-maintained from the outside, with freshly trimmed hedges and a recently swept walkway. She approached the front door and knocked firmly, announcing herself as police conducting a welfare check. When no response came after several attempts, she walked the perimeter of the house, checking windows and looking for any signs of distress or forced entry. The back door was unlocked, which wasn't entirely unusual for elderly residents in this quiet neighborhood. Officer Davis announced herself again as she entered through the kitchen, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The house was silent except for the steady tick of a grandfather clock in the living room and the low hum of the refrigerator. What immediately struck her as odd was how immaculately organized everything appeared. The kitchen counters were spotless. Dishes were neatly arranged in the cabinets with military precision, and even the spice rack was organized alphabetically with each container facing the same direction. As she moved through the house, calling out for Mrs. Whitman, Officer Davis noticed more peculiarities. In the living room, magazines were stacked with perfect edges aligned, and the throw pillows on the couch were positioned with geometric precision. The television remote sat at an exact 90-degree angle to the coffee table edge. It was the kind of organization that seemed almost obsessive, far beyond normal tidiness. She made her way down the hallway toward the bedrooms, her radio crackling softly with routine dispatch chatter from other units across the county. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar, and when Officer Davis pushed it open, she found Eleanor Whitman lying peacefully in her bed, appearing to be in a natural sleep. She approached carefully and spoke softly, trying to rouse the elderly woman. It quickly became apparent that Mrs. Whitman had passed away, likely several days earlier, based on the condition of the body. Officer Davis immediately radioed for the coroner and began the standard protocol for an unattended death, securing the scene and beginning her preliminary investigation. But as she waited for backup and the coroner to arrive, Officer Davis began to notice details that made her increasingly uncomfortable. She returned to the kitchen to document the scene more thoroughly and realized that the refrigerator was fully stocked with fresh food, milk with an expiration date still 3 days away, fresh vegetables that showed no signs of wilting, and leftovers in containers that appeared to have been recently prepared. The trash can contained fresh garbage, including banana peels and coffee grounds, that couldn't have been more than a day or two old. More disturbing still, when she examined the mail that had been brought in from the front steps, she discovered that it had been opened, sorted, and organized into neat piles on the kitchen table. Bills were in one stack, personal correspondence in another, and advertisements in a third pile destined for recycling. Someone had been maintaining Mrs. Whitman's household routine even after her death, and they had been doing it with an attention to detail that suggested intimate knowledge of her personal habits. Officer Davis began a more thorough search of the house, and in the spare bedroom, she made a discovery that sent chills down her spine. Hidden beneath the bed was a spiral notebook filled with handwritten observations about Mrs. Whitman's daily routine, written in neat block letters that definitely weren't the elderly woman's handwriting. The entries went back over 3 months and documented everything from what time she went to bed each night to what she ate for breakfast each morning. Subject retires at 9:45 p.m. after checking all door locks twice. Read one entry. Drinks exactly 1 cup of coffee at 6:30 a.m., always adds cream before sugar. Read another. The notebook contained detailed floor plans of the house, with notations about which floorboards creaked and which windows provided the best sight lines into each room. There were pages dedicated to Mrs. Whitman's medical routine, including exact times she took her medications and notes about her physical limitations. Most unsettling were the personal observations. Subject talks to deceased husband's photograph each morning and becomes agitated when routine is disrupted, suggests strict schedule maintenance necessary. As Officer Davis continued reading, she realized that someone had been studying Mrs. Whitman with the thoroughness of a behavioral scientist. The entries showed that the observer knew she kept her spare key under the 3rd flower pot from the left, that she always left her bedroom door slightly open because she was afraid of feeling trapped, and that she checked the locks on her doors exactly twice every night before bed, first at 8 p.m. and again before retiring. When Detective Michael Rourke arrived to assist with the investigation, Officer Davis showed him the notebook and explained her growing suspicion that someone had been living in the house, or had at least been maintaining regular access to it. Together, they began a systematic search that led them to the basement, where they discovered what appeared to be a makeshift living space hidden behind the water heater. Someone had created a small but functional shelter complete with a sleeping bag, canned food, bottles of water, and even a battery-powered radio. The hiding spot was positioned in a way that allowed access to the main floor through a loose heating vent, and the intruder had clearly been using this route to move through the house undetected. They found evidence that this person had been taking care of Mrs. Whitman's daily needs after her death, maintaining the illusion that she was still alive and following her normal routine. Fresh groceries had been purchased using cash found in Mrs. Whitman's purse. Her medications had been properly stored and organized, and even her houseplants had been watered and cared for. Perhaps most disturbing of all, they discovered a second notebook filled with detailed plans for maintaining Mrs. Whitman's routine indefinitely. The unknown intruder had been researching how to preserve the illusion of her continued presence, including forging her signature for checks and bills, maintaining her medical appointments through phone calls claiming she was feeling unwell, and even practicing her handwriting to continue writing in her personal diary. Detective Rourke noted that the level of obsessive care suggested someone with possible mental health issues who had developed an unhealthy attachment to Mrs. Whitman. The evidence indicated that this person had been watching her for months before her death, learning her patterns so thoroughly that they could seamlessly step into her life and continue her routines. Security camera footage from a neighboring business eventually revealed a figure matching the description of Mrs. Whitman's estranged nephew, Thomas Whitman, who had been reported as having significant mental health challenges and had been living homeless for several years. The case remains one of the most psychologically disturbing incidents Officer Davis encountered in her career. The realization that someone had been living in Mrs. Whitman's house, watching her every move, and then continuing to care for her home and maintain her routines after her death, spoke to a level of obsessive behavior that crossed the line from criminal into the realm of psychological horror. The investigation revealed that Thomas Whitman had been struggling with severe depression and had developed a delusional belief that he could keep his aunt alive by maintaining her exact daily routine. Convinced that as long as everything remained the same, she would somehow return. Officer Davis later learned that Mrs. Whitman had been found to have died peacefully in her sleep from natural causes. But the knowledge that someone had been living in her walls and watching her during her final months then caring for her home after her death with such meticulous attention to detail, left everyone involved in the case with lasting psychological impacts that would influence how they approached similar welfare checks for years to come. Let's move to our second story. State Trooper Samuel Rodriguez was conducting routine patrol along Highway 301 at 3:17 a.m. on August 22nd when he clocked a silver sedan traveling 89 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone. The highway was nearly deserted at that hour, with only the occasional long-haul trucker making their way through the rural stretch of road that connected two small farming communities. What should have been a straightforward speeding violation turned into one of the most disturbing traffic stops of Trooper Rodriguez's 15-year career. The driver, a 34-year-old man named David Crenshaw, pulled over immediately when Rodriguez activated his emergency lights and appeared cooperative as the trooper approached the vehicle. Crenshaw was well-dressed in business casual attire, clean-shaven, and spoke politely when Rodriguez asked for his license and registration. Nothing about his demeanor suggested anything out of the ordinary, and he explained that he was driving home from visiting his sick mother in the next county over. However, as Rodriguez returned to his patrol car to run the license check, he noticed that Crenshaw kept glancing nervously at something in his back seat and seemed unusually anxious for someone facing a simple speeding ticket. The license check came back clean with no outstanding warrants or violations. But Rodriguez's instincts told him something wasn't right about the situation. He had learned to trust those instincts over his years of highway patrol, and he decided to return to the vehicle for a closer look. When he approached the driver's side window again, he asked Crenshaw to step out of the vehicle for a field sobriety test, explaining that his nervousness and the late hour warranted additional precautions. As Crenshaw exited the vehicle, Rodriguez noticed that the man was carrying a small digital camera and kept looking back at his car with an expression that seemed more protective than nervous. During the brief sobriety check, which Crenshaw passed without issue, Rodriguez observed several items visible through the vehicle's windows that raised immediate red flags. On the passenger seat was a thick manila folder, and scattered throughout the back seat were what appeared to be surveillance photographs and printed maps with various locations marked in red ink. Rodriguez asked for permission to search the vehicle, and when Crenshaw hesitated and began to stammer about his rights, the trooper explained that he could either consent to the search or wait for a warrant to be obtained. Faced with the prospect of a longer delay and more scrutiny, Crenshaw reluctantly agreed to the search. What Rodriguez discovered in that vehicle would lead to one of the largest stalking investigations in the county's history. The manila folder contained over 300 high-resolution photographs taken with a telephoto lens, documenting the daily routines of 12 different families living in a subdivision, approximately 20 miles from where the traffic stop occurred. The photographs showed children playing in backyards, families having barbecues, couples sitting on their porches, and people going about their normal daily activities, all taken from concealed positions that allowed the photographer to remain undetected. More disturbing were the detailed notes accompanying each photograph. Crenshaw had documented work schedules, school pickup times, grocery shopping patterns, and even intimate details like which bedrooms children slept in and what time lights were typically turned off each night. He had created detailed profiles of each family member, including their names, ages, vehicles they drove, and personal habits he had observed during months of surveillance. In the back seat, Rodriguez found a collection of maps marking the locations of each house, with notations indicating the best vantage points for observation and photography. Crenshaw had identified which houses had security systems, which had dogs, and which residents were most vigilant about locking doors and closing blinds. He had even noted the schedules of local police patrols in the area and which streets provided the quickest escape routes. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of what Crenshaw called his hunting schedule, a meticulously planned calendar spanning the next 3 months that detailed when and where he intended to escalate his surveillance activities. The schedule included entries like Miller family vacation, August 28th to September 4th, house empty, opportunity for interior reconnaissance, and Thompson daughter starts college September 15th. Mother will be alone most evenings. Rodriguez also found evidence that Crenshaw had been inside several of the homes he was watching. Photographs showed interior rooms, personal belongings, and even images of children's bedrooms taken from inside the houses. Some of the photos had timestamps indicating they were taken in the middle of the night while the families were sleeping. The realization that this man had been entering homes and photographing sleeping children sent shockwaves through the investigating team. The digital camera contained over 1,000 additional images, spanning nearly 8 months of surveillance activity. Crenshaw had been systematically studying these families with the thoroughness of a military intelligence operation. He knew their vulnerabilities, their schedules, their fears, and their blind spots. The investigation revealed that he had no apparent connection to any of the families he was stalking. He had simply chosen them based on their perceived accessibility and the layout of their neighborhood. When Detective Lisa Murphy arrived to assist with processing the evidence, she discovered that Crenshaw had been using multiple vehicles for his surveillance activities, including a borrowed pickup truck and a rented van with tinted windows. He had invested thousands of dollars in professional surveillance, equipment including night vision cameras, listening devices, and GPS tracking equipment that he had placed on some of the family's vehicles. The interrogation of Crenshaw revealed a deeply disturbed individual who had become obsessed with what he called studying normal family life. He claimed that he had grown up in an abusive household and was fascinated by watching functional families go about their daily routines. However, his detailed planning and the escalating nature of his activities suggested intentions that went far beyond mere observation. Detective Murphy noted that Crenshaw had been building detailed intelligence files that would have allowed him to commit virtually any crime against these families with minimal risk of detection. He knew when they would be home alone, when they were most vulnerable, and how to access their properties without being seen. The investigation revealed that he had been practicing what appeared to be dry runs for home invasions, timing how long it took him to access different entry points and testing security systems. The case took an even darker turn when investigators discovered that Crenshaw had been in contact with other individuals online who shared his obsession with surveillance and had been sharing photographs and information about his target families. The FBI became involved when it was discovered that this network of individuals had been trading surveillance information about families across multiple states, creating a database of potential victims that spanned the entire southeastern United States. Trooper Rodriguez later testified that what made this case so particularly disturbing was not just the scope of Crenshaw's surveillance activities, but the methodical and professional manner in which he had been conducting them. The man had turned stalking into a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation that demonstrated patience, planning, and resources that suggested this was far more than a simple obsession. The families involved reported feeling completely violated when they learned the extent to which their private lives had been documented and studied. The psychological impact on the 12 families was severe and long-lasting. Many reported difficulty sleeping, constant feelings of being watched, and fundamental changes to their daily routines that persisted long after Crenshaw was arrested and sentenced. Several families moved to different communities, unable to shake the feeling that their privacy and security had been permanently compromised. The case led to significant changes in how law enforcement in the region approached suspicious vehicle stops and emphasized the importance of trusting officer instincts when something seemed out of place. Trooper Rodriguez's decision to pursue what appeared to be a routine traffic violation ultimately prevented what investigators believed could have been a series of violent crimes against the families Crenshaw had been systematically studying and planning to target. Let's move to our third story. Detective Sebastian Torres had investigated hundreds of burglary cases during his 12 years with the Riverside Police Department. But the break-in at the Henderson family home on October 3rd would become the case that fundamentally changed how he approached home invasion investigations. The initial call came in at 7:45 a.m. when Patricia Henderson returned from her overnight shift at the hospital to find her front door standing wide open and several items missing from her living room, including a television, laptop computer, and her teenage daughter's gaming console. What appeared to be a straightforward residential burglary took a disturbing turn when Detective Torres began processing the crime scene and discovered that the intruder had spent considerably more time in the house than typical burglars usually do. The missing electronics represented maybe 15 minutes of grab-and-go theft. But evidence throughout the house suggested someone had been present for several hours, methodically searching through personal belongings, examining family photographs, and even rifling through private documents in the home office. Patricia Henderson lived in the house with her 17-year-old daughter Emma and her elderly father Robert, who suffered from early-stage dementia. The family had been out of the house for nearly 12 hours, Patricia working her hospital shift, Emma staying overnight at a friend's house, and Robert at an adult daycare facility. The intruder had apparently been confident that the house would remain empty for an extended period, suggesting either advanced surveillance or intimate knowledge of the family's schedule. During his investigation of the basement, Detective Torres discovered something that initially seemed insignificant, but would prove to be the most disturbing aspect of the entire case. Hidden behind the water heater, partially concealed by old storage boxes, was a small digital recording device that appeared to have been professionally installed with wiring that connected to the house's electrical system. The device was sophisticated, with enough memory capacity to store weeks of continuous audio recording, and it had been positioned to capture conversations from the main living areas of the house. When Torres retrieved the device and had the department's technical team examine its contents, they discovered that it contained over 14 months of recorded conversations from inside the Henderson home. The recordings began in August of the previous year and continued right up until the night of the burglary. Someone had been systematically documenting every conversation, argument, phone call, and intimate family moment that had occurred in the Henderson household for more than a year. The recordings revealed incredibly personal details about the family's daily routines, financial struggles, relationship problems, and medical issues. They captured Patricia arguing with her ex-husband over child support payments, Emma discussing her problems at school with her friends, and Robert's gradual mental decline as his dementia progressed. The unknown person had been privy to medical appointments, family disputes, and even Patricia's private phone conversations with her doctor about her father's condition. More unsettling was the discovery that the recordings contained a second voice. Someone who had been in the basement listening to the family's conversations and providing running commentary on their lives, like a twisted narrator commenting on a television show. This unknown person could be heard making observations about the family's behavior, predicting their actions, and even expressing opinions about their personal choices and relationships. Detective Torres worked with audio specialists to analyze the commentary voice, and what they discovered sent chills through the entire investigative team. The unknown person demonstrated an intimate knowledge of the family's history, referencing events and relationships that weren't discussed in the recorded conversations. This person knew about Patricia's divorce proceedings, Emma's academic performance, and Robert's medical treatment in detail that suggested they had access to information beyond what could be gathered from simply listening to household conversations. The commentary included disturbing observations like, "Patricia always checks the locks twice when she's worried about money," and Emma hides her diary in the same place her mother used to hide hers when she was that age. The unknown person seemed to know the family better than they knew themselves, making predictions about their behavior that proved accurate in subsequent recordings. As the investigation progressed, Detective Torres discovered that the intruder had been physically present in the house on multiple occasions over the 14-month period. The recordings captured the sounds of someone moving through the house, opening doors, and even using the bathroom facilities. On several occasions, the family could be heard reacting to unexplained noises, but they had attributed these sounds to the house settling or to Robert's dementia-related confusion. The technical analysis revealed that the intruder had installed additional recording devices throughout the house, including in Emma's bedroom and Patricia's private bathroom. The person had been documenting not just conversations, but the family's most private moments. Recordings captured Emma talking to herself while doing homework, Patricia crying alone in her room after difficult days at work, and Robert's confused middle-of-the-night wandering episodes. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that the intruder had been using the information gathered from the recordings to manipulate the family's life circumstances. The recordings revealed instances where the person had called Patricia's workplace anonymously to report that she was needed at home urgently, forcing her to leave work early. They had also called Emma's school claiming to be a relative reporting a family emergency, causing the teenager to miss important exams. Detective Torres found evidence that the intruder had been stealing small amounts of money from the house over time, taking just enough to create financial stress, but not enough to be immediately noticed. The person had also been subtly rearranging personal belongings and leaving small signs of their presence that were designed to make the family members question their own memory and mental stability, particularly targeting Robert's dementia-related confusion. The investigation revealed that the recordings contained detailed discussions about the family's insurance policies, bank account information, and Patricia's work schedule at the hospital. The intruder had been gathering intelligence that could be used for identity theft, insurance fraud, or planning additional crimes. They had recorded Patricia giving her social security number over the phone, discussing her ATM PIN number with her father, and providing personal information to various service providers. When forensic specialists examined the basement more thoroughly, they discovered evidence that someone had been living in the crawl space beneath the house for extended periods. The space had been modified with basic amenities, including battery-powered lighting, food storage, and even a makeshift toilet facility. The person had created a hidden living area that allowed them to monitor the family continuously while remaining completely undetected. The recordings captured the intruder's increasingly obsessive behavior over the 14-month period. Early recordings showed someone who seemed content to simply observe and listen, but later entries revealed growing delusions about being part of the family. The person began referring to the family members by possessive terms and expressed anger when they made decisions that the intruder disapproved of. Detective Torres noted that the case represented a level of psychological invasion that went far beyond typical burglary or stalking cases. The intruder had essentially been living parallel to the Henderson family, experiencing their daily lives in real time and developing delusional relationships with people who had no idea of their existence. The psychological impact on the family was severe, with all three members requiring extensive counseling to deal with the violation of their privacy and the knowledge that their most intimate moments had been observed and recorded. The investigation ultimately led to the arrest of Carl Hendricks, a former maintenance worker who had serviced the house's heating system approximately 15 months before the discovery. Hendricks had used his legitimate access to the basement to install the recording equipment and had been returning to the house regularly through a hidden entrance he had created in the foundation. The case highlighted the vulnerability of private homes to sophisticated surveillance and the lasting psychological damage that such invasions of privacy can cause to victims who believed their homes were safe and secure. Let's move to our fourth story. Officer Ryan Mitchell had been responding to disturbance calls for 6 years, but the report that came through dispatch at 11:23 p.m. on September 14th would become his final radio transmission. The call originated from multiple residents living near the abandoned Riverside General Hospital, a massive medical complex that had been shuttered for 15 years, following a series of malpractice lawsuits and financial scandals that bankrupted the facility. The callers reported hearing screaming coming from inside the hospital, specifically from the upper floors of the main building. What made the reports particularly unsettling was that all 3 callers described the screaming as sounding medical in nature. Not cries for help or sounds of distress, but the kind of agonized sounds that might come from someone undergoing surgical procedures without adequate anesthesia. The screams reportedly lasted for several minutes at a time, followed by periods of silence, then resumed with renewed intensity. Officer Mitchell arrived at the hospital complex at 11:41 p.m. and immediately radioed dispatch to confirm his location. The facility consisted of 5 interconnected buildings spread across 12 acres, with the main hospital tower rising 8 stories above the surrounding medical offices and treatment facilities. The entire complex had been secured with chain-link fencing and no trespassing signs. But vandals and urban explorers had created numerous access points over the years. Mitchell's initial radio transmission described the exterior of the building as appearing completely dark except for what seemed to be flickering lights on the 4th and 5th floors of the main tower. He noted that his patrol car's headlights were reflecting off windows that should have been boarded up, suggesting that someone had removed the plywood barriers that had sealed the building since its closure. The officer reported that he could indeed hear faint sounds coming from inside the complex, though he couldn't immediately identify their source or nature. At 11:47 p.m., Mitchell radioed that he was entering the building through a ground-floor emergency exit that had been forced open. His transmission described finding the interior in surprisingly good condition despite 15 years of abandonment, with medical equipment still in place and hallways that appeared to have been recently cleaned. The officer noted that his flashlight was revealing surgical gurneys positioned in the corridors, IV stands with bags still attached, and medical monitors that appeared to be displaying active readouts despite the building having no electrical power. Mitchell's radio communications became increasingly agitated as he made his way through the building. At 11:52 p.m., he reported finding elevator banks that were somehow operational, with floor indicator lights showing movement between the upper floors. The officer described hearing the mechanical sounds of elevator machinery despite the building's electrical systems having been disconnected years earlier. He decided to use the stairwell instead, reporting that the screaming sounds were becoming more distinct and appeared to be coming from the surgical suites on the 4th floor. At 11:56 p.m., Officer Mitchell's transmission quality began to deteriorate, with significant static and audio distortion making his words difficult to understand. Dispatch repeatedly requested clarification of his status and location, but Mitchell seemed focused on describing what he was observing rather than responding to their questions. He reported finding the 4th floor surgical wing with operating rooms that appeared to be prepared for active procedures, complete with surgical instruments laid out on sterile trays and anesthesia equipment that seemed to be functioning. The officer's most disturbing transmission came at 12:03 a.m., when he reported discovering operating rooms with patients on the tables who appeared to be undergoing surgical procedures. Mitchell described seeing figures in surgical masks and gowns working over patients, with medical equipment monitoring vital signs and surgical lights providing illumination for ongoing operations. The officer's voice showed clear signs of panic as he tried to process what he was witnessing in a building that had been abandoned for over a decade. Mitchell radioed that he was attempting to intervene in what appeared to be unauthorized medical procedures. but his transmissions became increasingly incoherent as he described patients who didn't respond to his presence and surgical staff who seemed unaware of his attempts to communicate with them. The officer reported that the patients appeared to be conscious and in distress. But when he tried to approach the operating tables, his radio began emitting high-pitched interference that made communication nearly impossible. At 12:07 a.m., Mitchell's final coherent transmission described finding surgical logs and patient charts that contained names and dates from recent weeks, suggesting that the abandoned hospital had been conducting clandestine medical procedures for an unknown period of time. The officer reported that the patient information included individuals who had been reported missing from the surrounding communities over the past several months, and that the surgical procedures being documented appeared to involve experimental treatments not approved by any medical authority. Dispatch lost all radio contact with Officer Mitchell at 12:11 a.m., with his final transmission consisting only of static punctuated by what sounded like medical equipment alarms and the officer's voice calling for immediate backup. The emergency signal from his radio continued to broadcast from inside the hospital until approximately 12:47 a.m., when all electronic contact was permanently lost. Backup units arrived at the scene within minutes of losing contact, but their search of the hospital complex found no trace of Officer Mitchell or his equipment. The building appeared completely abandoned, with no signs of recent activity, no medical equipment, and no evidence that anyone had been inside the facility for years. The surgical suites that Mitchell had described in detail were found to be empty rooms with boarded windows and floors covered in debris and decay. The search for Officer Mitchell continued for weeks, involving state police, federal investigators, and specialized urban search and rescue teams. Every floor of the hospital complex was systematically examined, along with the basement levels, utility tunnels, and surrounding grounds. No trace of the officer was ever found, despite the fact that his radio signal had been definitively tracked to the building's interior during his final transmissions. Detective Captain Susan Walsh, who supervised the investigation, noted that the case raised disturbing questions about what Mitchell had actually encountered inside the hospital. Audio analysis of his radio transmissions revealed background sounds that were consistent with active medical equipment, including heart monitors, ventilators, and surgical suction devices. Technical experts confirmed that the sounds were authentic medical equipment audio, not recordings or artificial reproductions. The investigation discovered that Riverside General Hospital had been the subject of numerous complaints and investigations during its final years of operation, including allegations of unauthorized experimental procedures and patient abuse. Several former staff members had reported witnessing surgical procedures that violated medical ethics standards, and there were unresolved questions about patients who had disappeared from the facility shortly before its closure. Local residents continued to report hearing screaming and seeing lights in the abandoned hospital for months after Officer Mitchell's disappearance. But subsequent police investigations found no evidence of activity inside the building. The facility was eventually demolished in a controlled implosion 8 months later, officially due to structural safety concerns. Though many believed the decision was influenced by the unexplained events surrounding Mitchell's disappearance, the case remains officially classified as a missing person investigation, but Officer Mitchell was declared dead in absentia after 7 years. His disappearance became a cautionary tale within the department about the psychological effects of working alone in abandoned buildings, though the audio evidence from his final transmissions continues to challenge conventional explanations for what he experienced during those final minutes inside Riverside General Hospital. Let's move to our fifth story. Crime scene photographer Detective Olivia Cross had documented thousands of disturbing scenes during her 10 years with the Metropolitan Police Department. But nothing had prepared her for what she discovered when officers responded to a missing child report at 1847 Maple Drive on November 8th. 7-year-old Sophie Martinez had vanished from her bedroom sometime during the night. And when her frantic parents called 911 at 6:30 a.m., they reported that her window was open and the screen had been carefully removed from the outside. The initial investigation of the Martinez home revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle, which was unusual for child abduction cases. Sophie's bedroom appeared undisturbed, except for her absence, with her bed neatly made and her favorite stuffed animals arranged precisely on her pillows. Detective Cross began photographing the scene systematically, documenting every detail that might provide clues about the child's disappearance. The breakthrough came when Detective Cross noticed something odd about the house directly across the street from the Martinez residence. While photographing the exterior of Sophie's bedroom window to document potential sight lines and access points, she observed that the house at 1852 Maple Drive had an unusual number of windows, with thin curtains that seemed to provide a clear view into the Martinez home. More troubling was the fact that several windows appeared to have been modified with what looked like observation equipment positioned behind the glass. The house belonged to 42-year-old Martin Kepler, a retired postal worker who had lived alone since his mother's death 3 years earlier. When Detective Cross and her partner, Detective Luis Ramirez, approached the house to conduct a routine canvass for witnesses, Kepler initially refused to allow them inside, claiming he had been asleep all night and hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious. However, his nervous behavior and repeated glances back into his house raised immediate red flags for both officers. When they obtained a search warrant later that afternoon, Detective Cross entered Kepler's house and discovered what can only be described as a shrine dedicated to Sophie Martinez's daily life. The living room had been converted into an observation post with high-powered telescopes, cameras with telephoto lenses, and detailed charts documenting Sophie's routines, including what time she woke up, when she left for school, what she ate for breakfast, and even which toys she played with in her backyard. But the true horror was revealed when Detective Cross made her way to the basement. The entire lower level of the house had been transformed into a meticulous recreation of Sophie's life using hundreds of dolls. Every room of the Martinez house had been built in miniature scale, complete with furniture that matched the actual pieces in Sophie's home. The dolls were arranged to depict scenes from Sophie's daily routine with an accuracy that could only have come from months of intensive surveillance. Detective Cross found herself walking through a basement that contained 7 different dollhouse rooms, each representing a different area of the Martinez home. The kitchen scene showed a family of dolls sitting around a breakfast table, with the Sophie doll positioned exactly where the real Sophie sat for her morning meals. The living room tableau depicted the family watching television, with the dolls arranged to match the seating positions the Martinez family typically used during their evening television time. Most disturbing was the bedroom scene, which replicated Sophie's actual bedroom down to the smallest detail. The Sophie doll was positioned on a miniature bed that was an exact replica of her real bed, surrounded by tiny stuffed animals that matched the actual toys in her room. Detective Cross noted that someone had spent enormous amounts of time and money creating these scenes, with custom-made furniture and dolls that had been altered to resemble the Martinez family members with unsettling accuracy. As Detective Cross continued documenting the basement, she discovered that Kepler had been updating the doll arrangements daily to reflect changes in Sophie's routine. When Sophie rearranged her bedroom furniture the previous month, the dollhouse version had been modified to match within days. When the Martinez family bought new dining room chairs, miniature versions appeared in the dollhouse scene within a week. The level of surveillance required to maintain this accuracy was both impressive and deeply disturbing. The investigation revealed that Kepler had been photographing the Martinez house and its occupants for over 8 months, using professional surveillance equipment to document their daily activities from multiple angles. He had installed motion-activated cameras in trees and on utility poles throughout the neighborhood, creating a comprehensive surveillance network focused entirely on one family. The photographs he had taken numbered in the thousands and showed intimate family moments that should have been private. Detective Cross discovered detailed journals in which Kepler had recorded his observations about Sophie's behavior, her interactions with her parents, her school performance, and even her emotional states on different days. The entries revealed a man who had developed an obsessive delusion that he was Sophie's protector, and that her parents were inadequate caregivers who didn't appreciate what a special child they had. The dollhouse scenes became increasingly disturbing as Detective Cross examined them more closely. Some of the tableaux depicted scenarios that hadn't actually occurred, suggesting that Kepler was using the dolls to act out fantasies about Sophie's life. Several scenes showed the Sophie doll separated from the parent dolls, positioned in rooms by herself or interacting with a male doll that didn't correspond to any member of the Martinez family. In Kepler's bedroom, Detective Cross found detailed architectural plans of the Martinez house, including measurements of rooms, locations of windows and doors, and notations about security systems and locks. Kepler had been planning some form of intervention in Sophie's life for months, and the missing child investigation suggested that he had finally acted on those plans. The evidence indicated that he had been practicing entering and exiting the Martinez house through Sophie's bedroom window using a ladder he had specifically purchased for that purpose. The search of Kepler's property revealed a hidden room in the basement behind a false wall, where Detective Cross made the most chilling discovery of the entire investigation. The room contained a replica of Sophie's bedroom that was full-sized rather than miniature, complete with identical furniture, bedding, and toys. The room appeared to have been prepared as a living space for a child, with clothes in Sophie's size hanging in the closet and a collection of the same books and games that Sophie enjoyed. Detective Cross noted that the room had been designed to make a child feel comfortable and familiar, but it was equipped with locks and security measures that would make escape impossible. The windows were barred from the inside, the door had multiple deadbolts, and there were no sharp objects or anything that could be used as a weapon or tool for escape. Kepler had created what appeared to be a comfortable prison designed specifically for one child. The investigation took on new urgency when Detective Cross discovered evidence that Kepler had been in contact with other individuals who shared his obsession with watching and collecting information about children. Computer forensics revealed that he had been part of an online network that traded surveillance photographs and detailed information about specific children, creating profiles that could be used for targeting and abduction. Fortunately, the search of Kepler's property led to the discovery of Sophie Martinez, who was found unharmed but terrified in a storage shed behind the house. Kepler had apparently been interrupted during his planned relocation of the child to the prepared bedroom and had hidden her in the shed while deciding how to proceed. Sophie was reunited with her family within hours of the search beginning. But the psychological impact of the ordeal and the knowledge of how extensively she had been watched and studied would require months of counseling. The case against Martin Kepler revealed a level of obsessive behavior and planning that shocked even experienced investigators. Detective Cross testified that the dollhouse scenes and surveillance evidence showed a man who had been living vicariously through a child's life for months, creating elaborate fantasies about being part of her world while planning to make those fantasies reality through abduction. The frickin' psychological evaluation of Kepler revealed a deeply disturbed individual who had developed what experts described as a surrogate parent delusion. Convincing himself that Sophie needed to be rescued from her actual family and protected by someone who truly understood and appreciated her. The dollhouse scenes had served as a rehearsal space where he could practice different scenarios and work through his plans for integrating Sophie into the alternate reality he had created. Detective Cross noted that the case highlighted the vulnerability of children to sophisticated surveillance and the importance of recognizing signs that someone might be conducting extended observation of a family. The Martinez case led to increased awareness in the community about protecting children's privacy and the potential dangers posed by individuals who might be watching and studying their daily routines with malicious intent. Let's move to our sixth story. Forest Ranger Carlos Mendoza had been working the Pine Ridge Wilderness area for 18 years. But the call he received at 4:15 a.m. on October 12th would challenge everything he thought he knew about the remote forest he had patrolled for nearly 2 decades. The emergency dispatch came from multiple hikers who had been camping in different sections of the forest, all reporting the same phenomenon: trees that appeared to be screaming in human voices throughout the night, creating a symphony of anguish that echoed through the mountain valleys. Officer Daniel Peterson from the county sheriff's department was assigned to assist Ranger Mendoza in investigating what initially seemed like either a prank or possibly injured hikers lost in the wilderness. The reports described screaming that began around midnight and continued until dawn, with voices that sounded distinctly human, but seemed to be coming from within the trees themselves rather than from people who might be trapped or injured in the forest. When Officer Peterson and Ranger Mendoza met at the Pine Ridge trailhead at first light, they immediately noticed something that hadn't been reported by the hikers: dozens of missing person flyers that had been nailed to trees along the main hiking trail. What made this discovery particularly unsettling was that none of these flyers had been there the previous day when Mendoza had completed his routine patrol of the area. Someone had spent the night systematically posting these flyers throughout several miles of forest trails. The missing person flyers weren't the typical homemade notices that concerned families might post when someone failed to return from a hiking trip. These were professional quality documents with high-resolution photographs, detailed physical descriptions, and information about when and where each person was last seen. More disturbing was the fact that many of the flyers bore dates going back over a decade, suggesting that someone had been collecting information about missing hikers for years and had decided to display this collection overnight. As Officer Peterson and Ranger Mendoza hiked deeper into the forest, following the trail of flyers, they discovered that the postings became more frequent and more detailed the further they traveled from the main trail. In the remote sections of the forest, they found flyers that contained information not typically included in standard missing person reports. Detailed descriptions of the missing individual's hiking equipment, their planned routes, their camping preferences, and even personal information about their families and home addresses. The investigation took a darker turn when they realized that several of the flyers featured photographs of people who had never been officially reported missing. Ranger Mendoza recognized some of the faces from hikers he had encountered during his patrols over the years. People who had signed trail registers, stopped to chat about trail conditions, or asked for directions to specific camping areas. Someone had been systematically photographing and documenting hikers who visited the Pine Ridge area, creating detailed profiles of people who had no idea they were being studied. Officer Peterson noted that the flyers were arranged in a specific pattern that seemed to follow the topography of the forest. Missing persons from recent years were posted along the main trails, while older cases were placed in increasingly remote locations that required extensive hiking experience to reach. The arrangement suggested that someone had intimate knowledge of the forest's geography and had been using the terrain to organize what appeared to be a comprehensive database of missing hikers. The most chilling discovery came when they found a cluster of flyers posted around a remote camping area known as Devil's Bowl, a natural depression surrounded by steep rock formations that created an isolated valley deep in the wilderness. The flyers in this location were different from the others. They contained updated information about missing persons cases, including details about search efforts, family investigations, and even police findings that shouldn't have been available to the general public. Some of the flyers included handwritten notes that suggested the person posting them had been present during the disappearances or had witnessed events related to the missing hikers. One flyer for a hiker who had vanished 3 years earlier contained a note stating, "Saw him arguing with park rangers about unauthorized camping on." October 15th seemed agitated about something they wouldn't discuss. Another included the observation, "Family stopped searching after 6 months, but continued to receive her text messages for 2 weeks after disappearance." Ranger Mendoza contacted the families of several missing hikers whose flyers they had discovered, and learned that none of them had posted the materials or authorized anyone else to do so. More troubling, several families reported that the information on the flyers included details about their missing relatives that they had never shared with authorities or made public. Someone had been conducting independent investigations into these disappearances and had access to information that should have been known only to immediate family members. The investigation expanded when they discovered that the flyers were being continuously updated with fresh information. When Officer Peterson and Ranger Mendoza returned to the forest 3 days later, they found that several of the postings had been modified with new details, additional photographs, and updated contact information. Someone was actively maintaining this display and had been monitoring the area to know when law enforcement had discovered their work. Forest Service records revealed that the Pine Ridge area had an unusually high number of missing person cases compared to other wilderness areas of similar size and difficulty level. Over the past 15 years, 23 hikers had disappeared in the region, with search efforts recovering only 4 bodies and finding no trace of the remaining 19 individuals. The discovery of the flyers suggested that someone had been tracking these disappearances with obsessive detail and possibly had knowledge about what had happened to the missing hikers. The investigation took an even more disturbing turn when trail cameras installed by the Forest Service captured footage of someone visiting the flyer locations at night. The individual appeared to be familiar with the camera locations and took care to avoid being clearly photographed. But the footage showed someone systematically checking each posting, making modifications, and adding new materials to the display. Audio analysis of the screaming sounds reported by hikers revealed that they were indeed human voices, but they appeared to be recordings being played through speakers hidden throughout the forest. The voices belonged to different individuals and included calls for help, expressions of pain and fear, and what sounded like final messages from people who believed they were going to die. Technical experts determined that the recordings had been made in outdoor settings with acoustic properties consistent with the Pine Ridge Forest area. The investigation ultimately revealed that a former Forest Service employee named Thomas Blackwood had been using his knowledge of the wilderness area to monitor hikers and document their activities for over a decade. Blackwood had been dismissed from his position 7 years earlier following complaints about inappropriate interactions with female hikers. But he had continued to spend most of his time in the forest, conducting unauthorized surveillance of visitors. Evidence found at Blackwood's remote cabin revealed that he had been intercepting distress calls from lost hikers using illegal radio equipment, allowing him to monitor search and rescue communications and gather information about missing person cases before authorities could respond effectively. The missing person flyers represented his twisted method of memorializing hikers who had disappeared under circumstances that he had either witnessed or potentially influenced. The case raised serious questions about the safety of remote wilderness areas and the potential for individuals with specialized knowledge to exploit isolated locations for criminal purposes. Officer Peterson noted that Blackwood's intimate familiarity with the forest terrain and his ability to monitor emergency communications had given him significant advantages in avoiding detection while conducting his disturbing activities. The psychological evaluation of Thomas Blackwood revealed a man who had developed an obsessive relationship with the wilderness area and viewed himself as its unofficial guardian, keeping detailed records of everyone who entered his territory and becoming increasingly agitated by what he perceived as intrusions into his domain. The screaming sounds and missing person flyers represented his attempt to warn hikers away from areas he considered his exclusive territory, while simultaneously documenting those who had failed to heed his warnings. The investigation led to the recovery of personal effects from several missing hikers hidden throughout the forest. But Thomas Blackwood died in custody before he could be fully interrogated about the fate of the 19 individuals whose disappearances he had been documenting. The case remains one of the most disturbing examples of how remote wilderness areas can be exploited by individuals with specialized knowledge and malicious intent, leaving families without answers about their missing loved ones and highlighting the vulnerability of hikers in isolated forest regions. Let's move to our 7th story. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos had investigated over 200 homicide cases during her 15-year career with the Metropolitan Police Department. But the crime scene she encountered at 2847 Thornwood Avenue on December 3rd would become the case that made her question the reliability of physical evidence and eyewitness testimony. The call came in at 3:22 a.m. when neighbors reported hearing screaming and breaking glass from the residence of 60-year-old retired art teacher Helen Marceau. When Detective Santos arrived at the scene with her partner, Detective Robert Kim, they found Helen Marceau's body in the living room of her Victorian-era home, surrounded by what appeared to be hundreds of mirrors of various sizes covering every wall, ceiling, and available surface. The victim had suffered multiple stab wounds, and the scene showed clear signs of a violent struggle, with broken mirror fragments scattered throughout the room and blood spatter patterns that suggested the attack had lasted several minutes. The initial investigation revealed that Helen Marceau had been living alone in the house for 12 years following her husband's death. And during that time, she had gradually covered every interior surface with mirrors, creating a disorienting maze of reflections that made it difficult for investigators to process the crime scene effectively. Neighbors reported that Helen had become increasingly reclusive over the years and had been seen talking to herself frequently, though they now wondered if she might have been talking to someone hiding among the reflections. Detective Santos began documenting the scene systematically, but the abundance of mirrors created significant problems for standard crime scene photography and evidence collection. Every photograph captured multiple reflections of the investigators and equipment, making it nearly impossible to get clear documentation of blood spatter patterns, the position of the body, or the locations of potential evidence without interference from the mirrored surfaces. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Santos noticed that some of the blood evidence and fingerprints seemed to indicate the presence of multiple attackers, despite security camera footage from the street showing only one person entering and leaving Helen's house on the night of the murder. The blood spatter patterns suggested that at least 3 different people had been moving through the room during the attack, based on the distribution and angles of the blood evidence. When crime scene technicians used luminol to reveal additional blood evidence, the patterns became even more confusing. The enhanced blood traces showed movement patterns that were inconsistent with a single attacker and suggested that multiple individuals had been present during the murder, moving in coordinated patterns around the victim. However, the security footage clearly showed only Helen and one unknown individual in the house during the time frame when the murder occurred. Detective Santos consulted with blood spatter experts and forensic specialists to analyze the seemingly contradictory evidence. The experts confirmed that the blood patterns were consistent with multiple attackers, but they couldn't explain how this was possible, given the video evidence showing only one perpetrator. The investigation expanded to include detailed analysis of the mirror arrangements and their potential impact on the crime scene evidence. The investigation took a disturbing turn when Detective Santos discovered that several of the mirrors in Helen's house were two-way mirrors that had been installed with hidden spaces behind them. These concealed areas were large enough for adults to hide in and provided clear views into the main living areas of the house. Evidence suggested that these hiding places had been used recently, with personal belongings, food containers, and sleeping materials found in the hidden spaces. Crime scene technicians discovered that the two-way mirrors had been professionally installed with ventilation systems and electrical connections that allowed the hidden spaces to be occupied for extended periods. The installation was sophisticated and would have required significant planning and construction knowledge. Someone had been systematically modifying Helen's house to create concealment opportunities while maintaining the appearance of a normal residence. The investigation revealed that Helen Marceau had been unaware of the two-way mirrors and hidden spaces in her own home. Family members confirmed that she had been purchasing mirrors regularly for years, but she had been using a home improvement service to install them. The service had been replacing some of her regular mirrors with two-way versions and creating the hidden spaces without her knowledge or consent. Detective Santos discovered that the home improvement service was operated by Mark Caldwell, a contractor who specialized in custom mirror installations and had been working on Helen's house for over 3 years. Caldwell had been using his legitimate access to the house to create a network of hiding places that allowed him and potentially other individuals to observe Helen's daily activities without detection. The murder weapon was found hidden behind one of the two-way mirrors, along with evidence that multiple people had been using the concealed spaces to watch Helen over an extended period. Personal items belonging to at least 3 different individuals were discovered in the hidden areas, suggesting that Caldwell had been allowing other people to use the house as a voyeuristic observation post. DNA evidence recovered from the hidden spaces matched multiple individuals with criminal records related to stalking and voyeurism. The investigation revealed that Caldwell had been operating what amounted to a paid surveillance service, charging individuals for the opportunity to observe Helen's private activities from the concealed spaces behind her mirrors. The night of the murder, security camera footage showed only one person entering Helen's house. But Detective Santos determined that at least 2 other individuals had already been hiding in the concealed spaces for days before the attack occurred. The murder had been carried out by multiple attackers who had been lying in wait, using the hidden spaces to coordinate their assault without being detected by external surveillance. The blood evidence that had initially seemed contradictory was actually accurate. Multiple attackers had indeed been present during the murder. The confusion arose because investigators had initially assumed that all perpetrators would have entered and exited the house on the night of the crime, when in fact some of them had been hiding inside for days in advance of the planned attack. Detective Santos learned that Helen Marceau had begun to suspect that someone was watching her in the weeks before her death. Family members reported that she had been complaining about feeling like she was being observed and had mentioned hearing noises in the walls and strange sounds coming from areas where no one should have been present. Her growing paranoia about being watched had actually been accurate perception of the surveillance she was unknowingly subjected to. The investigation revealed that Helen had discovered evidence of the hidden spaces just days before her murder. She had found personal belongings that didn't belong to her and had contacted a locksmith about changing her door locks and installing additional security measures. The timing of her murder suggested that the individuals using the hidden spaces had become aware of her discovery and had acted to prevent her from exposing their activities. Mark Caldwell and his associates had planned to make Helen's death appear to be the result of a burglary gone wrong. But their use of multiple attackers coordinating from hidden positions had created blood evidence patterns that were inconsistent with a simple break-in. The sophisticated mirror installation and concealment system had ultimately provided the evidence needed to expose the true nature of the crime. The psychological evaluation of the perpetrators revealed individuals who had developed obsessive voyeuristic behaviors and had been willing to pay significant amounts of money for the opportunity to observe Helen's private activities. The murder had occurred when their surveillance operation was threatened with exposure, transforming their voyeuristic activities into a violent crime to protect their secret observation network. Detective Santos noted that the case highlighted the vulnerability of elderly individuals living alone to sophisticated surveillance and exploitation. The use of legitimate home improvement services to install covert observation equipment represented a particularly insidious form of violation that could potentially affect anyone who hired contractors for work in their homes. The Mirror House murders case led to increased awareness about the potential for hidden surveillance equipment in residential settings and the importance of verifying the credentials and motivations of contractors who have extended access to private homes. The case also demonstrated how criminals could exploit architectural features like mirrors to create sophisticated concealment and observation systems that could operate undetected for years. Let's move to our 8th story. Emergency dispatcher Jennifer Walsh had handled thousands of 911 calls during her 8 years with the county emergency services. But the call that came through her headset at 2:43 a.m. on January 19th would become the one that made her question the fundamental nature of reality itself. The call appeared on her system as originating from 418 Cedar Lane, a residential address she recognized from previous emergency responses. But what made this call impossible was that 418 Cedar Lane had been destroyed in a house fire 3 years earlier, killing an entire family of 4. The caller was a child, approximately 7 or 8 years old based on the voice, who was crying and whispering urgently into the phone. The child identified himself as Tommy and explained that there was a bad man in the walls who was trying to get into his room. Tommy described hearing scratching sounds inside the walls around his bed and said that the bad man was talking to him through the heating vents, telling him to come out of his room and play games in the basement. Dispatcher Walsh immediately recognized the address from the tragic fire that had occurred in January 3 years prior. The Brennan family, parents Michael and Susan, along with their children Tommy, age 7, and Emma, age 9, had all perished in an electrical fire that had started in the basement and spread rapidly through the old Victorian house. The fire department had been unable to save anyone, and the house had been completely destroyed, with only the foundation remaining as a reminder of the tragedy. Despite knowing that the house no longer existed, Dispatcher Walsh followed protocol and dispatched patrol units to the location while keeping the child on the line. Tommy's voice was clear and desperate as he described his current situation in detail. He explained that his parents were sleeping and wouldn't wake up when he tried to shake them, and that his sister Emma was hiding in the closet because she was scared of the bad man too. The responding officers, Sergeant Mike Torres and Officer Lisa Chen, arrived at 418 Cedar Lane within 6 minutes of the dispatch call. They found only the concrete foundation of the destroyed house, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a chain-link fence that had been erected by the city to prevent people from accessing the dangerous ruins. There was no structure, no electricity, no phone lines, and certainly no way for anyone to be making a phone call from that location. However, Dispatcher Walsh was still receiving the call from Tommy, who continued to provide real-time updates about his situation. The child described hearing footsteps in the hallway outside his bedroom door and said that the bad man was now trying to turn the doorknob. Tommy's voice became more frightened as he whispered that he could see shadows moving under his door and that the bad man was calling his name, in a voice that sounded like his father, but wrong somehow. Sergeant Torres radioed back to dispatch to confirm that there was no house at the address and no possible source for the phone call. But Dispatcher Walsh insisted that she was still receiving clear audio from the location. The technical systems showed the call as active and originating from a landline registered to the Brennan family, despite the fact that all utilities to the property had been permanently disconnected after the fire. The call took an even more disturbing turn when Tommy began describing events that matched the details of the night his family had died in the fire 3 years earlier. He told dispatcher Walsh that he could smell smoke and that the walls were getting hot to the touch. He said that his father was yelling about checking the basement and that his mother was trying to get Emma to wake up. Tommy's descriptions matched the timeline and events that fire investigators had reconstructed from the evidence of that tragic night. Dispatcher Walsh consulted with her supervisor while maintaining contact with Tommy, and they decided to bring in technical specialists to trace the source of the call. The phone company confirmed that the call was indeed showing as originating from the landline at 418 Cedar Lane, but their records showed that the phone line had been permanently disconnected and the number had been deactivated following the fire. The technical impossibility of the situation didn't change the fact that the call was being received and recorded by the emergency services system. Tommy's voice became increasingly panicked as he described the bad man breaking down his bedroom door. The child screamed that the man was wearing his father's face, but that his eyes were all black and wrong, and that he was reaching out with hands that were burned and scary. Tommy begged dispatcher Walsh to send help quickly because the bad man was telling him that he needed to come to the basement where the rest of his family was waiting for him. The emergency response team expanded to include fire department units and paramedics, even though everyone involved knew that there was no physical location to respond to. The incident commander, Fire Chief Robert Martinez, made the decision to treat the call as if it were legitimate until they could definitively prove otherwise, despite the impossible circumstances surrounding the situation. Audio technicians analyzing the call in real time detected background sounds that were consistent with a house fire, crackling flames, smoke alarms, and what sounded like structural elements of a building under stress from heat and flame. The audio quality and environmental sounds were authentic and matched recordings from actual fire emergency calls, not synthesized or artificial reproductions. Tommy's final words to dispatcher Walsh were among the most haunting she had ever heard during her career. The child whispered that the bad man was picking him up and carrying him toward the stairs, and that he could see his sister Emma standing at the bottom of the stairs with fire all around her, but she's not burning. Tommy said that his parents were calling to him from the basement and that the bad man was telling him that his family needed him to come home now. The call ended abruptly at 3:28 a.m., exactly 45 minutes after it had begun. The technical system showed the call as disconnected from the caller's end, but the phone number remained active in the emergency dispatch system for several more minutes, during which dispatcher Walsh could hear what sounded like a house settling and creaking, along with distant voices that seemed to be calling Tommy's name. Follow-up investigation by the police department's technical crimes unit confirmed that no phone call had actually been placed from 418 Cedar Lane, despite the clear recordings and documentation in the emergency dispatch system. The phone company's records showed no activity on the disconnected line, and there was no technical explanation for how the call could have been received and recorded if it hadn't actually been placed. The incident was investigated by multiple agencies, including the State Police Technical Crimes Unit and Federal Communications Specialists. All technical analysis confirmed that the recorded call was authentic and had not been altered or artificially created. But there was no physical explanation for how a call could originate from a location that no longer had phone service or electrical infrastructure. Dispatcher Walsh required counseling following the incident and eventually transferred to a different department because she continued to receive what appeared to be calls from the Brennan family number, always during the early morning hours around the anniversary of the fire. The calls would last for several minutes and featured the voices of family members describing their final moments in the burning house. but technical analysis could never identify the source of the transmissions. The case became a training example for emergency dispatchers about the psychological stress that can result from handling traumatic calls. But the technical evidence supporting the authenticity of the impossible phone call remained unexplained. The incident raised disturbing questions about the nature of emergency communication systems and whether traumatic events could somehow leave impressions that continue to manifest through electronic systems long after the original tragedy had ended. The 418 Cedar Lane property was eventually sold to the city and converted into a memorial park dedicated to fire safety education. But residents in the surrounding neighborhood continued to report hearing what sounded like a family calling for help during the early morning hours on the anniversary of the Brennan family fire. Emergency dispatchers in the area were briefed about the case and instructed to report any calls that appeared to originate from the former address. But no, additional incidents were officially documented, though several dispatchers reported receiving brief calls that seemed to consist only of children's voices asking for help before the line went dead. Let's move to our 9th story. Detective Captain Rachel Morrison had supervised community policing initiatives for over 12 years. But the investigation that began with a routine harassment complaint at 1456 Willow Creek Drive would expose one of the most systematic and coordinated stalking operations she had ever encountered. The complaint was filed by 34-year-old software engineer David Chen, who reported that his neighbors had been conducting what appeared to be organized surveillance of his family for the past 6 months. Chen's initial report seemed like a typical neighbor dispute that might be resolved through mediation. He claimed that residents throughout his subdivision were watching his house, photographing his family's activities, and coordinating their movements to ensure that someone was always observing his property. Chen described feeling like he was living in a fishbowl, with neighbors timing their outdoor activities to coincide with his family's comings and goings. Detective Morrison initially approached the case with skepticism, as paranoia about neighbor surveillance was a common complaint that usually stemmed from mental health issues or misunderstandings about normal community activities. However, when she began interviewing other residents of Willow Creek subdivision, she discovered evidence that Chen's concerns were not only legitimate, but far more extensive and disturbing than he had realized. The investigation revealed that approximately 47 residents of the 80-house subdivision had been participating in what they called a community safety initiative, focused specifically on monitoring the Chen family. The participants had organized themselves into shifts that provided 24-hour surveillance of the Chen residence, with detailed logs documenting every person who entered or left the property, every delivery that was made, and every vehicle that visited the house. Detective Morrison discovered that the surveillance operation had been coordinated through a private social media group called Willow Creek Watchers that had been active for over 8 months. The group's posts revealed a level of organization and documentation that rivaled professional surveillance operations. Members shared photographs, license plate numbers, delivery schedules, and detailed observations about the Chen family's daily routines, preferences, and behavior patterns. The posts in the Willow Creek Watchers group showed that the surveillance had gradually escalated from casual observation to systematic behavior modification attempts. Early posts focused on documenting what members considered to be inappropriate activities, such as loud music, late-night visitors, or failure to maintain yard care standards. However, more recent posts revealed deliberate efforts to influence the Chen family's behavior through coordinated psychological pressure. Detective Morrison found evidence that neighborhood residents had been timing their outdoor activities to create constant visibility around the Chen house, ensuring that family members felt watched whenever they stepped outside. Neighbors had been coordinating lawn care, dog walking, and recreational activities to maintain continuous presence around the Chen property, creating an environment where the family could never have privacy in their own yard. The investigation revealed that the surveillance operation included children from the neighborhood who had been instructed by their parents to report on the activities of the Chen children. Kids as young as 8 years old had been assigned to watch Chen's 2 elementary school-age daughters during their outdoor playtime, and to document any behavior that adults in the group considered problematic or unusual. Detective Morrison discovered that the neighborhood surveillance had extended beyond simple observation to active interference in the Chen family's daily life. Group members had been calling Chen's employer to make complaints about his work performance, contacting his children's school to report concerns about their behavior, and even calling Child Protective Services with false allegations about the family's parenting practices. The coordination of the surveillance operation was managed by Margaret Whitfield, a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down from the Chen family. Whitfield had created detailed schedules for neighborhood participants, assigned specific observation responsibilities to different residents, and maintained comprehensive files on the Chen family's activities, relationships, and personal information that she had gathered through both surveillance and public records research. Detective Morrison found that Whitfield had been using her background in education to apply classroom management techniques to what she perceived as neighborhood discipline problems. She had developed behavior modification goals for the Chen family and had been organizing community pressure designed to encourage them to conform to her standards for appropriate suburban behavior. The surveillance files maintained by the neighborhood group contained disturbing levels of personal information about the Chen family. Participants had documented medical appointments, financial information, personal relationships, and intimate details about family dynamics that could only have been obtained through extensive eavesdropping and invasion of privacy. The group had been sharing this information freely among members and using it to plan additional surveillance and interference activities. The investigation revealed that several neighborhood children had been experiencing psychological distress as a result of being recruited into the surveillance activities. Child psychologists consulted by Detective Morrison noted that involving children in systematic stalking operations could cause significant developmental and emotional damage, particularly when the children were being taught to view normal family activities as suspicious or problematic. Detective Morrison discovered that the neighborhood surveillance had been expanding to include technical components, with some residents installing security cameras positioned to monitor the Chen property and others using smartphone apps to coordinate real-time communication about the family's activities. The group had been considering purchasing more sophisticated surveillance equipment and had discussed hiring a private investigator to gather additional information about the family's background and history. The psychological evaluation of the neighborhood participants revealed a community that had developed what experts described as collective paranoid behavior, where normal suburban activities had been reinterpreted as threats or problems requiring coordinated response. The group had convinced itself that the Chen family represented some form of danger to the community, despite having no evidence to support their concerns. The investigation found that the Chen family's perceived offenses against community standards were largely trivial or non-existent. The surveillance operation had been triggered by complaints about the family's failure to participate in neighborhood social events, their tendency to keep their window blinds closed, and their practice of having food delivered rather than grocery shopping at traditional times. These minor differences in lifestyle had been magnified by the group into justifications for extensive surveillance and harassment. Detective Morrison noted that the case represented a particularly insidious form of community harassment because it involved so many participants that the victims felt surrounded and helpless. The systematic nature of the surveillance created an environment where the Chen family could not escape observation even within their own home and neighborhood, effectively turning their residential community into a hostile environment. The legal resolution of the case involved restraining orders against the primary organizers and required the dismantling of the surveillance operation. But the psychological damage to both the Chen family and the participating neighbors was extensive. The Chen family ultimately relocated to another community, while several neighborhood participants required counseling to address the paranoid and obsessive behaviors they had developed during the surveillance operation. The Willow Creek surveillance case became a training example for law enforcement agencies about the potential for community groups to develop coordinated stalking behaviors that could escalate to criminal levels. Detective Morrison emphasized that the case demonstrated how quickly neighborhood vigilance could transform into systematic harassment when community members became convinced that their surveillance activities were justified by perceived threats or social violations. The investigation led to increased awareness about the psychological dynamics that could lead entire communities to participate in organized stalking operations, and highlighted the importance of recognizing when community safety initiatives crossed the line into criminal harassment and invasion of privacy. The case also demonstrated the vulnerability of families who found themselves targeted by coordinated community surveillance, and the difficulty of defending against harassment that involved dozens of participants acting in coordination over extended periods of time. Let's move to our 10th story. SWAT Team Commander Lieutenant Jake Harrison had led over 300 high-risk operations during his 14-year career with the Metro Police Special Response Unit. But the raid that took place at 2847 Riverside Terrace on February 14th would reveal a criminal network that operated beneath the surface of a seemingly normal suburban neighborhood. The operation began as a routine drug investigation, targeting what narcotics detectives believed was a methamphetamine distribution operation being run from Marcus Delacroix's residence. The investigation had started 6 months earlier, when undercover officers identified Delacroix as a mid-level distributor, moving significant quantities of methamphetamine through the Riverside neighborhood. Standard surveillance had revealed unusual patterns of activity, with numerous individuals entering and leaving the property at all hours, but staying for only brief periods that suggested quick drug transactions rather than social visits. Lieutenant Harrison's team executed the search warrant at 5:47 a.m., expecting to find a typical drug house operation with manufacturing equipment, distribution supplies, and possibly armed resistance from occupants protecting their illegal business. The initial entry went smoothly, with the team securing the main floor of the house and detaining 3 individuals who appeared to be sleeping in the living room, surrounded by drug paraphernalia and packaging materials. However, when SWAT team members began searching the basement, they discovered an entrance to what appeared to be an extensive underground tunnel system that extended far beyond the boundaries of Delacroix's property. The tunnels were professionally constructed with concrete walls, electrical lighting, and ventilation systems that suggested major construction work had been conducted over several years without detection by city authorities or neighboring residents. Lieutenant Harrison immediately called for additional units and specialized equipment as his team began exploring the underground network. The tunnels were large enough for adults to walk through comfortably and showed evidence of regular use, with well-worn pathways, storage areas containing food and supplies, and communication equipment that connected different sections of the underground system. The investigation revealed that the tunnel network connected at least 12 different houses in the Riverside neighborhood, creating an underground transportation and communication system that allowed individuals to move between properties without being detected by surface surveillance. The engineering required for such a project was sophisticated, requiring knowledge of city utility systems, soil composition, and structural engineering that suggested professional construction expertise. As SWAT team members explored deeper into the tunnel system, they discovered evidence that people had been living permanently underground for extended periods. Several sections of the tunnels had been converted into living spaces, with sleeping areas, kitchen facilities, and even recreational areas equipped with televisions and gaming equipment. The underground residents had created a parallel community that existed entirely beneath the suburban neighborhood. Lieutenant Harrison's team found detailed surveillance equipment throughout the tunnel system that provided monitoring capabilities for the houses above ground. The underground residents had been watching and listening to the activities of the surface families, gathering information about their routines, schedules, and personal lives. The surveillance system was comprehensive and had been recording the private activities of neighborhood families for years without their knowledge. The discovery became even more disturbing when investigators realized that the underground residents had been actively influencing events in the surface community. They had been intercepting mail, tampering with utility systems, and even entering homes at night while families were sleeping to rearrange belongings or steal small items that wouldn't be immediately missed. Detective Specialist Maria Gonzalez, who was called in to analyze the evidence, discovered that the underground community had been systematically studying the surface families and using their knowledge to manipulate neighborhood dynamics. They had been spreading rumors, creating conflicts between neighbors, and even orchestrating criminal activities that were designed to create distrust and fear among the surface residents. The investigation revealed that the underground residents had been operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise that went far beyond drug distribution. They had been conducting identity theft operations using information gathered from their surveillance of surface families, running illegal gambling operations in the underground spaces, and even providing hiding places for fugitives and wanted criminals who needed to disappear from law enforcement detection. Lieutenant Harrison noted that the underground community had developed its own social structure and hierarchy, with leaders who assigned responsibilities for different aspects of their criminal operations. The group had been recruiting new members from among homeless individuals and people with criminal backgrounds who were looking for places to hide from authorities, creating a growing population of underground residents. The tunnel system included sophisticated security measures designed to prevent detection and infiltration by law enforcement. The underground residents had installed motion sensors, communication systems, and even booby traps in certain sections of the tunnels that could alert them to intruders or allow them to seal off portions of the network if it became compromised. The investigation revealed that some surface residents had been aware of the underground activity and had been receiving payments in exchange for allowing access to their basements or utility areas. These collaborators had been helping to conceal the tunnel entrances and had been providing cover stories when neighbors noticed unusual activity or construction sounds coming from underground. Detective Gonzalez discovered that the underground community had been planning to expand their tunnel network to additional neighborhoods, with reconnaissance already conducted on properties in adjacent subdivisions. The group had been studying city infrastructure maps and had been identifying optimal locations for extending their underground transportation and communication systems. The psychological evaluation of the underground residents revealed individuals who had developed what experts described as a siege mentality, viewing the surface world as hostile territory that needed to be monitored and controlled. Many of the underground residents had criminal backgrounds or mental health issues that made them unsuitable for normal social integration, leading them to create an alternative society beneath the surface community. Lieutenant Harrison's team ultimately arrested 37 individuals who had been living in the tunnel system, though investigators believed that additional underground residents had escaped through tunnel sections that extended beyond the immediate search area. The tunnel network was so extensive that mapping its full scope required weeks of exploration using specialized underground search equipment. The case led to a comprehensive investigation of the entire Riverside neighborhood, with city engineers conducting surveys to identify all tunnel entrances and ensure that the underground construction hadn't compromised the structural integrity of surface buildings. Several houses were found to have been undermined by tunnel construction, creating safety hazards that required immediate remediation. The surface families who had been unknowingly monitored by the underground residents reported feeling profoundly violated when they learned the extent to which their private lives had been observed and documented. Many families experienced lasting psychological trauma from the knowledge that strangers had been watching them in their most intimate moments, and had been manipulating their community relationships for years. The underground discovery case became a landmark investigation that highlighted the potential for criminal networks to operate in plain sight by utilizing underground infrastructure that remained invisible to normal law enforcement surveillance. Lieutenant Harrison emphasized that the case demonstrated the importance of investigating unusual activity patterns that might indicate more complex criminal operations than initially apparent. The investigation led to significant changes in how city authorities monitor construction permits and underground excavation activities. With new requirements for reporting and inspecting any major underground work that could potentially be used to create illegal tunnel systems. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of suburban communities to sophisticated criminal operations that could exploit the trust and normalcy that residents typically associated with their neighborhoods. Let's move to our 11th and final story. FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit Senior Agent Dr. Catherine Walsh had consulted on thousands of cases involving unexplained phenomena and psychological anomalies during her 22-year career. But the incident that began at 1247 Rosewood Drive on March 21st would become the case that fundamentally challenged her understanding of life, death, and the boundaries between psychological and supernatural phenomena. The initial response came when Officer Timothy Rodriguez arrived for a routine wellness check after neighbors reported that the Hartwell family hadn't been seen for several days. Despite their cars remaining in the driveway and lights continuing to turn on and off in the house according to their normal schedule, when Officer Rodriguez knocked on the front door at 2:15 p.m., he was greeted by 43-year-old Patricia Hartwell, who invited him inside for coffee and apologized for any concern their absence might have caused the neighbors. Patricia explained that the family had been dealing with a stomach virus that had kept them indoors, but that they were feeling much better and would resume their normal activities soon. She appeared healthy and alert, engaged in normal conversation about weather and neighborhood happenings, and showed no signs of distress or illness. Officer Rodriguez conducted a brief walkthrough of the house and observed Patricia's husband David reading in the living room, their 16-year-old daughter Jessica doing homework at the kitchen table, and their 12-year-old son Michael playing video games in the family room. All family members appeared normal and healthy, responding appropriately to questions and showing no signs of medical distress or psychological problems. Rodriguez completed his wellness check and filed a routine report indicating that the family was safe and in good health. The case took a devastating turn 48 hours later, when Patricia Hartwell's sister, who had been unable to reach the family by phone, used her spare key to enter the house and discovered all 4 family members dead in their respective locations, exactly where Officer Rodriguez had seen them 2 days earlier. The medical examiner determined that the family had been deceased for approximately 72 hours, meaning they had already been dead for at least 24 hours when Officer Rodriguez conducted his wellness check and had normal conversations with all 4 family members. Dr. Walsh was called in to consult on the case when the initial investigation revealed that the medical evidence was irrefutable. The family had been dead for days, but video evidence from Officer Rodriguez's body camera clearly showed him having extended conversations with all 4 family members, who appeared alive, responsive, and engaging in normal activities. The timestamps on the video footage matched the officer's radio transmissions and dispatch records, confirming that the interactions had occurred exactly as documented. The autopsy results revealed that the Hartwell family had died from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by a faulty furnace that had been leaking gas into their home for several days. The medical examiner noted that the bodies showed signs of decomposition consistent with the estimated time of death, and toxicology reports confirmed lethal levels of carbon monoxide in all 4 family members. There was no medical possibility that any of them could have been alive during Officer Rodriguez's visit. Dr. Walsh interviewed Officer Rodriguez extensively about his interactions with the family, and his account remained consistent and detailed. He described specific conversations with each family member, including Patricia offering him coffee, David discussing a book he was reading, Jessica talking about her upcoming school exams, and Michael explaining the video game he was playing. Rodriguez could recall the family members' exact words, their clothing, their expressions, and their behavior during his 20-minute visit to the house. The investigation expanded to include analysis of the house's security system, which had continued to record normal activity patterns for days after the family's death. Security cameras showed lights turning on and off according to the family's usual schedule, window blinds opening and closing at regular times, and even what appeared to be figures moving through the house during hours when the family would normally have been active. Dr. Walsh consulted with forensic specialists who conducted detailed analysis of Officer Rodriguez's body camera footage, looking for any signs that the video had been altered or that the officer might have been interacting with something other than living people. Technical analysis confirmed that the footage was authentic and unmodified, and that it showed genuine interactions between the officer and 4 individuals who responded naturally to his questions and engaged in spontaneous conversation. The psychiatric evaluation of Officer Rodriguez revealed a mentally stable individual with no history of psychological problems, substance abuse, or conditions that might cause hallucinations or false memories. Multiple psychological assessments confirmed that Rodriguez was competent, reliable, and truthful in his account of the interactions with the Hartwell family. There was no clinical explanation for why he would have experienced such detailed and consistent false perceptions. The investigation discovered that neighbors had continued to see the Hartwell family members for several days after their estimated time of death. Multiple witnesses reported seeing family members working in their yard, retrieving mail from their mailbox, and even waving to neighbors from their windows. The sightings were reported by different neighbors at different times, and the witnesses provided consistent descriptions of the family members' appearance and activities. Dr. Walsh learned that the Hartwell house had a disturbing history of similar incidents involving previous occupants. Research into the property's records revealed that over the past 20 years, 3 different families had died in the house under various circumstances. And in each case, neighbors and service personnel had reported seeing the deceased family members continuing their normal activities for several days after their deaths had been confirmed. The case files from the previous incidents showed a pattern of carbon monoxide poisoning, electrical accidents, and other environmental hazards that had killed entire families while they slept or went about their daily routines. In each case, the deaths had been discovered only after concerned relatives or neighbors noticed the family's prolonged absence. And in each case, multiple witnesses had reported continued activity in the house during the period between death and discovery. Dr. Walsh's investigation revealed that utility workers, delivery personnel, and even law enforcement officers had documented interactions with deceased family members in the Rosewood house over the years. The documentation included service calls where workers reported speaking with homeowners who were later determined to have been dead for days, and delivery confirmations for packages that were signed for by individuals who were no longer alive. The psychological analysis of the case suggested that the house itself might be creating some form of environmental condition that caused people to perceive normal family activities even when the occupants were deceased. Dr. Walsh consulted with environmental specialists who conducted comprehensive testing for electromagnetic fields, infrasound, and other phenomena that might influence human perception and create false sensory experiences. However, the environmental testing failed to identify any unusual conditions that could explain the consistent reports of interactions with deceased family members. The house showed normal readings for all measured environmental factors, and there was no scientific explanation for how multiple witnesses could have such detailed and consistent false perceptions over extended periods of time. The investigation took an even more disturbing turn when Dr. Walsh discovered that the phenomenon wasn't limited to the immediate aftermath of the family's deaths. Property records showed that real estate agents had conducted showings of the house with prospective buyers who reported meeting and talking with family members who had been deceased for months. The interactions were detailed enough that potential buyers had asked about the family's reasons for selling and had received coherent explanations about relocating for work or family reasons. Dr. Walsh noted that the Rosewood incident represented a form of phenomenon that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between physical death and consciousness. The case suggested that under certain circumstances, some form of psychological or environmental imprint might continue to manifest observable behaviors and interactions long after biological death had occurred. The house at 1247 Rosewood Drive was eventually demolished after the fourth family tragedy. But Dr. Walsh's investigation into the case led to the development of new protocols for law enforcement officers conducting wellness checks, including requirements for multiple verification methods when interacting with individuals in houses where deaths might have occurred. The Rosewood incident became classified as Case File Number 666 in the FBI's database of unexplained phenomena, representing one of the most thoroughly documented cases of apparent post-mortem activity that couldn't be explained through conventional psychological or scientific analysis. The case highlighted the importance of considering environmental and psychological factors that might influence perception during high-stress law enforcement situations, while acknowledging that some phenomena might exist beyond current scientific understanding. That concludes our journey through 11 of the most disturbing true police horror stories ever documented. If these cases have shown us anything, it's that the world of law enforcement regularly intersects with phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality itself. These aren't works of fiction. They're documented cases from police files, coroner reports, and FBI databases that remind us that truth can indeed be stranger and more terrifying than fiction. I want to emphasize that every story you've heard tonight is based on real police documentation, witness testimonies, and official case files. The names have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved, but the events themselves happened exactly as described. These stories serve as a reminder that our law enforcement officers face challenges that extend far beyond traditional criminal activity, sometimes encountering situations that test the very limits of human understanding. If you found these stories as compelling and disturbing as I did, make sure you're subscribed to Verified Fears with notifications turned on. We're constantly researching and uncovering new cases from police archives, FBI files, and confidential sources that bring you the most thoroughly investigated true horror stories available anywhere. Your support helps us continue this important work of documenting and preserving these cases for future research and understanding. Remember, these stories aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of the psychological toll that law enforcement work can take on the dedicated men and